Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to r/EntitledPeople, where people truly believe they can do what they want, when they want, and nobody else matters. And in today's episode, a scummy HOA president decides to mess with OP, the new guy, and OP absolutely destroys him. Guys, we've got lawsuits, threats, destruction of property. It's absolutely wild. I hope you enjoy the stories today. Hit subscribe if you're not subscribed, and as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. Let's dive in. So this story is about a property I own, but rent out. And this may sound strange, but I don't think I could afford to live there these days, as it's become somewhat exclusive. Also, this is going to be very long, so get ready. Here's the background. So about 1 million years ago, my property was a part of a large farm. I bought it about 30 years ago, long after the farm was broken up, but before there was any development near it. The piece of land I got was near the back entrance that joined into a dirt road that ran past. The more expensive plots were near the tarred road in the front. I originally bought a large chunk of the land intending to do some farming, but that never happened. About 20 years ago, some of the owners got organized, who we'll call organized owners, and had the area designated as a municipal suburb. The municipality agreed to put in tarred roads, water, and electricity if a certain percentage of the properties were developed. A construction company linked to the organized owners went around contacting the owners who had land but no buildings, offering to build houses for us at a very, very reasonable price, contingent on them getting a certain minimum amount of people signing up. While this was happening, one of the organized owners approaches me and offered to buy half of my property. I agreed, and the money I got for the sale, combined with a small loan from the bank, gave me what I needed to pay for a house to be built, and it was a fairly large and nice house too. I stayed in the house for a few years, and my mom moved in with me. I had decided to subdivide the property again and build her house next to mine. But unfortunately, an undiagnosed tumor took her before the house could even be started. Well, it was diagnosed, but it was too late to do anything. Soon after Mom died, we moved out of the house and started renting it out. About a few weeks before we moved out, the organized owner who I'd sold the land to starts talking about starting an HOA. I wasn't interested, and I left soon after. About 2 years later, the guy contacts me. There were 2 roads entering the area these days. The original tarred road that was near where the farmhouse had been and was entered from a fairly busy main road, and my dirt road back entrance, which was now a tarred entrance from a wide but not very busy municipal road. The HOA was trying to get the old farm road blocked off to improve security and decrease through traffic, and wanted the road next to my property to be the main and only entrance to the HOA community, and they were pressuring me to join. I said no, and I was adamant, and eventually they accepted that. But they told me they wanted to have a sign near the road welcoming people to the neighborhood, and the only practical place to put it was on the edge of my property. They also wanted to build a little guard hut and have a security guard there, keeping an eye out on who went in and came out. And they wanted to build his shed on my property. So we came to an agreement, whereby they would mow the lawn and pay the equivalent of about $35 per month in exchange for the land they needed. I was very happy with this arrangement, since the property was fairly large, and it didn't cost them anything since they already had a full-time gardening service servicing the HOA. This all happened over a decade ago. They eventually got the other main road blocked off, and the HOA's paying for a rent-a-cop to be permanently stationed close to my property, as well as mowing my lawn and paying me enough money for takeaways for the family each month. I'm occasionally contacted by members of the HOA to get me to sign up, but I'm not really interested. My property has been rented to the same tenant for all these years, and everything there is going well for me, until about 3 years ago. So one day, someone scared the crap out of my tenant's younger daughter by making strange noises and shooting a gun close to her bedroom window 3 or 4 times over a month. This scared my tenant, and I guessed it scared the HOA, because they and my tenant contacted me with a proposal. The proposal was that I join the HOA, and they give me exclusions from the HOA rules, including exclusions from paying the monthly fees. And in addition, they'll build a wall around the entire HOA neighborhood, including electric fencing and security cameras. They told me they wanted to do this for a while, but they were unwilling to build the wall on a property that was not in the HOA. I couldn't see the downside, so I agreed. But then came the dishonest dealings. It took a little over a year to build the wall and get everything completed, which is quite fast. And then a month after everything was done, my tenant got an HOA warning about his dogs barking. He told the HOA that while the property was in the HOA, it was exempt from the rules. The HOA told him that they had canceled the exemptions, and he had 30 days to comply. So he contacted me, and I opened some mail I'd gotten from the HOA. And man, did I get a surprise. They had gone back on their word and canceled the exemptions, and they were claiming that 1. I paid the late fees going back over a year, which was hundreds of dollars. 2. That the easement agreement had been canceled, and they were canceling it a year back because the HOA contract allowed them to use, quote, small unused portions of HOA members' land for the common good for free. 3. That I refund them the money they had paid for the easement over that period. 4. That I owed them money for the gardening service mowing my large lawn. And lastly, that I would be fined for each infraction my tenant failed to remedy. Now, this starts an expensive process involving lawyers and the court system that ends with the judge telling me that what the HOA had done was mostly legal. They had the right to revoke the exemptions, but they had to give me a 30 days notice. As I was walking to my car, the organized owner, the one who bought half my land many years ago, told me that I was stupid to have refused to join when the HOA started, as I could have been a founder member, whatever that means. And next time, I should be sure to understand documents before I sign them. The guy made me so mad with his condescending tone and smirk on his face. So I decided to get back at them. The neighbor was right. I should have read the contract better. Also, I was interested in what it meant to be a founding member, which, spoiler alert, meant absolutely nothing. So when I got home, I grabbed the HOA contract I had signed, as well as all the other documentation they provided me with, and I started reading. I was determined to break every single rule I could find a loophole to break. I didn't get past the first page. While the street address of the property is used to identify it for all practical purposes, in the city records, it has a unique property number that has to be used on legal records. When my mom moved in, I had subdivided the remaining property, but I hadn't yet started building on it. And when I gave the HOA the easement all those years ago, it had been on the property I'd sliced off for my mom. And when the HOA set up the contract, they had simply used the property number from the easement. The next afternoon, the organized owner neighbor delivered and had me sign for 2 documents. One telling me that my exemptions would expire in 30 days, and one letting me know that the easement would no longer be required after 30 days. I think he was being a bit malicious here because I lived an hour away from the property, and the guy drove out himself. And here's where I get back at him. Exactly 30 days to the hour after the HOA had given me the 30 days notice, I knocked on neighbor owner's door, and did I mention he was president of the HOA, and had him sign 2 documents. The first was that I planned to build a house on my HOA property, which confused him. And the second was a notice that they had 30 days to remove from my property the guard shed, the parts of the electric boom that were on my property, as well as the sign. He tried to engage me, but I ignored him. I climbed into my car and drove off. Early next morning, I get a call from the HOA lawyer, who then explained to me that their junk would be staying on my property, since it was, quote, in an unused part of my land. I explained that I was building a house there and the land would not be unused anymore. I could hear the smirk as he told me that building a second house to be spiteful would not be accepted by the courts. I sure hope he could hear the smirk in my voice when I told him that the property in question did not have a house, and was in fact barely large enough for a house to be built, and would not be large enough for any extraneous buildings. I then told him to go look up the property in question and then to call me back. And I want to note, I had sliced off just enough to be legal, which was just enough to build a small house. It took them under 5 days to get back to me. Their lawyer told me that the terms of the easement meant that I could not cancel without their permission, so I emailed him a photo of the document they sent me canceling the easement. That afternoon, neighbor owner invites me to lunch, his treat, to discuss the problem. I told him no thanks. The guy extended the offer again 2 days later, and again I said no thanks. And this is when others of the original organized owners contacted me to try to talk. Some sounded aggressive, some sounded sympathetic, and I said no thanks to each of them. Eventually, the lawyer phoned and asked if we could come to some sort of arrangement. So I asked what he had in mind, and he told me he was prepared to discuss exclusions in exchange for access to my property. So I said no thanks, please don't call me again. That said, about 9 days before their 30 days was up, I get a call from a different lawyer. He said he wanted to negotiate a surrender. His words, not mine. So I agreed to meet with him at his office the next day. I had the documents drawn up, and the meeting was as simple as me giving him the documents and him reading them over. My new easement offer, 1, included everything offered by the old easement offer. 2, I changed the line, mow the lawn, to get the property to HOA standards and keep it there, since it was now in the HOA. 3, would cost them about $500 per month instead of $35, and the amount would be increased with inflation. Number 4, when canceled for whatever reason, the HOA would have to pay me a cancellation fee of around $7,500. Number 5, the contract automatically terminated 30 days after 1, any disciplinary action was taken against me, my tenant, or the property. 2, any complaints were levied by the HOA against the property. And 3, any legal action was taken against the property by anyone in the HOA. Number 6, that the lawyer who had offered to negotiate surrender would be allowed to mediate any disputes between us at the HOA's expense. And number 7, the HOA would pay all my legal fees if any legal action was taken against me. Now, I deliberately left some insane things in there, so I could appear to concede some points or be negotiated down when the HOA got indignant about the points I actually cared about. And the lawyer did not look happy, but he'd have to have the HOA president look at them. This is when I reminded him that in 8 days, I would be setting a group of men armed with sledgehammers and anger management issues loose on whatever of theirs was still on my property. That evening, I get an irate call from the HOA president. He told me he was never going to sign the new contract. I said, okay. He then told me I was charging way too much per month, and that it should be the same rate as the previous contract. This is when I point out when I signed the previous contract, the area was still under development, and there was at least one other road leading in and out. But now, there was only mine. And besides, mine was now developed with everything they needed. He then told me that I was forcing them to sign a document they don't want to sign. I told him he was free to not sign it. He then whined about everything he could think of, and eventually, he told me I would be hearing from his lawyer. The next morning, surrender lawyer calls to ask if I'd be willing to come to their offices to sign the contract. I agreed. When I got there that afternoon, I learned that surrender lawyer was not a lawyer, but he was a paralegal. He handed me the contract and asked me to sign it. He then laughed when I told him that I'd have to read through it first to make sure nothing was changed. And he mumbled something like, "I'm sure you would." So I read the contract and nothing had been changed, not a single thing. The HOA president had signed it, with the surrender paralegal signing as a witness. I then looked at him and said, "Why did he sign it? It's so stupid to sign this." And this is when the paralegal looked at me and said, I started telling him that signing would be a bad decision, but he told me I wasn't being paid to think or give legal advice, and to shut up. So I shut up. I then said to him, "Do you understand what he signed here?" He then looks at me and nods, and he said I asked him if I should have one of the lawyers look at it before giving it to you. And he told me we'd already billed enough for this, and that he would sign it and sue me after their easement was safe. This happened about 1.5 years ago. It took 6 months for the HOA to find out how screwed they were. They wanted to sue me, but their lawyers explained to them that there was no way to win. Even if the court sided with them, all they would get is the easement contract voided, and they didn't think the court would side with them. The lawyers were adamant about one thing. The HOA could not live with the stipulation of HOA pays my legal fees if any action was taken against me. Since it didn't limit the people taking legal action against me to the HOA, as worded, the HOA would be forced to pay for my legal fees if anyone took legal action against me. They argued that the courts would probably not enforce that, since the context of the agreement was to do with the HOA, and I told them I was prepared to find out, since the HOA would definitely be the ones taking action against me if they challenged it. I eventually signed an addendum to the contract that said the neighbor HOA, the HOA president, would personally pay my legal fees unless he held no position at all in the HOA, and that the HOA would pay all my legal fees if the HOA took legal action against me. He resigned from the HOA at the end of that meeting. I politely told him in front of everyone that he should not sign documents unless he understands what he's signing. The guy didn't look pleased. It came out during the mediation that without the ability to control access to the HOA neighborhood through the security boom, which was partially on my property, the HOA would be in breach of their own articles and would be dissolved. I also learned that all the security cameras were wired and all terminate in the guardhouse, the guard shed. So basically, it was my way or the end of the HOA. The first mediation was really quite funny. My paralegal looked more than a little glum as we assembled and he called everyone to order. I suspected that he had been told to work against me, so I took initiative. I reminded everyone there that I agreed to let paralegal mediate, but that I agreed to no arbitration at all. If I didn't feel like the proceedings were fair, I would leave and they could go ahead and sue. Paralegal brightened up and things actually went quite well. I'm writing this after getting home from the latest mediation. I built a paddling pool for the neighborhood dogs, as in I made it myself. I dug a hole, packed it with stone, and added a concrete finish. It was my first attempt, and it looked, well, terrible. The HOA called for a mediation meeting in which they told me as nicely as they could that the paddling pool was an eyesore right at the entrance of the HOA. I asked them to create a list of what needed to be fixed and how it needed to be fixed to give me at the next meeting. The list was extensive. It basically required the pool to be rebuilt from scratch. So I asked them if there was any way to reduce the cost on the work they needed to get it up to HOA standards, and they assured me there was not. This is when I thanked them and pulled out a copy of the agreement, where they agreed to, quote, get the property to HOA standards, which I highlighted, and then handed it to them with the list. I told them the HOA usually preferred if these things were dealt with within 30 days. They start arguing until the mediator reminds them that they couldn't force me to comply without causing the easement to end. I should also mention that their lawyers usually no longer attend these things. They said they would get it done. I also learned a lot about the neighbor guy today. I found out that 1, he had sold his property 3 months back and is apparently leaving the country for Australia. Number 2, I found out that the HOA had successfully sued him for a crap ton of money that they had lost to his mismanagement as part of his vendetta against me. Number 3, I also learned he had a vendetta against me. I have no idea what I did to upset him. I'm not sure I'll screw with the HOA anymore. I think I'm close to breaking them. The only thing stopping them from canceling the contract is the massive financial loss if they do. I guess a lot depends on how they treat me and my tenants going forward. Also, I do like the monthly payments though, so I'm motivated to play nice. Guys, what a freaking epic story that was, and OP was freaking brilliant. Like when I read that the HOA president signed the contract after he told Mr. Paralegal to shut up, I actually laughed out loud because I knew how it was going to end for them. Again, brilliant move by OP, and way to fight back against a nasty, scummy HOA. And this person shares their experience, guys, and they say, I've had a previous experience with this group as I live in a neighborhood that has an HOA, but I was there before the rest of the houses were built and before they formed this group. I'm also not a member in any way, and that's been verified by a real estate attorney. So anyways, apparently the HOA have this rule over how many lights you can put up and what the earliest date is you can put them up. The Queen HOA, who I deal with the most when I upset them, came by on November 30th and told me that my lights were against the policy and I wasn't allowed to have as many lights up as I do. I told her that we've been over this before and I'm in no way beholden to their policies and I don't care. I told her out of respect to the people in the neighborhood, I wasn't going to deck out my whole house with fancy lights, but my nieces and nephews do love lights, so I'd be putting up a fair amount. I also told her that I don't care about their stupid rules. The rules that the lights could only be on during certain hours. I told her that once I'm done putting them up, I would likely turn them on and leave them on until Christmas, and maybe even after Christmas. She then told me that me breaking the rules upsets other people in the neighborhood, and that I should respect their rules. Even if I don't live in an HOA, I technically live in the neighborhood. She then offered me a flyer which apparently had the rules for lights. I just tossed it in the trash and told her to get off my property. As OP should. Like, thank goodness I don't live in an HOA neighborhood anymore. And even when I did, I don't think they had crazy rules for when lights could be on or off, or how many lights you could have on your home. That just sounded a bit over the top. It was probably a nasty Karen who hates Christmas or something. And this person says, just over a month ago, I helped my dad and his wife move into a new build that they were waiting almost 2 years to be completed. I saw this as a downgrade from their previous house that was sitting on 2 acres, had a beautiful kitchen, as well as a massive 2-story garage that my brothers and I helped him build. But he decided it was too difficult to maintain as he's getting older, and decided to get into something more easy to manage. So we went out to breakfast with him and my oldest brother this morning, when he said that his house was on the market for 8 days before it sold. I didn't understand why he brought this up, as his house was on the market a while ago, and I thought that he just brought up something random about his old house with the sweet garage. This is when my brother asked, "Wait, your brand new house?" And he nods his head. I couldn't believe it. I thought to myself, I spent 2 days helping you move. What do you mean you sold your house? He then went on to explain that per HOA rules, he needed approval to have a shower rail installed in their bathroom. He's 62, and he wasn't allowed to have an inoperable vehicle in their own garage. My dad and brother are gearheads, so that's going to be an issue. The final straw was when they got a cease and desist letter from the board's attorney for a conversation that my dad was having on his back patio that the president overheard as she was walking her dog. They had no idea that she was their neighbor from across the street. Apparently, she had gone as far as to have cameras pointed at their house after this. So my dad asked his lender to look over the bylaws. After 20 minutes, the lender calls back and said, "Yeah, you need to get the F out of there." I don't know how he pulled it off, but he lived in the house for just over a month. He discovered his HOA were fascist and he sold the house in 8 days. And he'll make $10,000 to $15,000 when all is said and done. I came home and I told my wife we'll never get into a house that's a part of an HOA. I can't believe my poor dad has to deal with this at his age, but I guess this is why you should always read the fine print. I guess I'll be helping him move again in a month. Yeah, moving does suck, but you know what else sucks? When you're trying to build a life in a new community who has these stupid rules in place and try to control everything. Like, did I read that right? The HOA's president sent OP's dad a cease and desist letter for having a conversation on the back patio. Like, I'm sorry, is OP's dad living in an HOA or a frickin' prison? But guys, let me know if you live in an HOA and if your HOA enforces absolutely over-the-top rules. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our slash entitled people. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed yesterday's episode on the channel, it's in our slash I don't work here lady episode, where OP gets slapped by a Karen and she learns a painful mistake. Guys, go check it out if you haven't, and myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.